Storytime, Episode 13, continuing on with SCP-001, Ouroboros, Step 001/02, Open File. 052, The Nazarene. Female, Middle Eastern descent, appears to be in her 20s. Extremely little information exists about the individual called the Nazarene. Even the origins of her name are unknown. The only source able to provide any information about her insists on two things, specifically, that she is never seen without 051, and that she has changed over time. Early Foundation documents mention 052 as being the head of the Foundation's Department of Morality, now the Ethics Committee, though it does not appear as if she ever served in that role. One source indicated that her name perhaps comes from the fact that she is never seen without a pair of dark gloves, which she never removes in public, leading some to believe she's hiding scars on her hands or wrists from her crucifixion as Jesus of Nazareth, though where this rumor began and what would lead anyone to draw that conclusion in the first place is unknown. Decryption complete. Access log. Chapter 12. Convictions. Now. The garden, if nothing else, was tranquil, untouched by man for 100,000 years. Its waters were clear, and its grasses green, and the sun overhead nearly always occupied a blue sky. On the rare occasions it would rain, the garden's tranquility would turn into a melancholy, a quiet gloom that settled over it like a blanket. At the next sunrise the rains would subside, and the garden would dry, and all would be as it has been for 1,000 generations. Today, though, it was raining. "Step aside!" Aaron screamed, tearing across the plain towards the gate. The guardian, stalwart and unmoving, did little to acknowledge him besides slightly raising its flaming sword. Aaron's eyes burned into the guardian, his gaze locked on the unseeing helmet of the Goliath before him. As the tip of the sword began to luminesce, and as a streak of fire lanced out of it towards him, Aaron produced a thin metal rod with a tripod base and a blue glowing tip. He rolled out of the way of the flame, and as another began to form on the guardian's sword, he slammed the reality anchor into the ground. The world shimmered for a moment, and Aaron could feel the ground beneath him vibrating. In his mind's eye, he could see threads, endless trillions of threads in the air around him, each of them tuned to a specific note in the song of the universe. Their melody was discordant, and no more so than around the guardian, where their song shrieked and howled. As the tip of the anchor flashed, the threads harmonized in unison, each of them momentarily drawn back in line with each other. As the choral pitch struck the guardian, it ceased, the fire in its sword drawing back into its body, and then folding it in upon itself until it was little more than charred skeleton, broken and festering, hanging loosely in the air by blue threads. Aaron sprinted toward the gate, but felt himself growing unexpectedly exhausted. He looked down at himself and saw the hands of an old man, one whose life had been touched by the hand of fate and stretched unnaturally. His skin grew taut, and he felt his muscles atrophying with every step. He struggled forward, the hum of the reality anchor behind him growing fainter and fainter until he could no longer hear it, and his body was renewed. Reaching the gate, he threw it open and ran inside. It was said that the night Adam LSM took Eve as his wife, he had dreamed of Eden as she conceived her first son, and it was born with he. When the child had grown, Adam longed for a sword to put in his hand, and the garden had provided it. When the children of the night and the mournful gods bore down on the world of men, the garden had sheltered them. Eden was such that, endless a space as it was, anyone within it was never far from wherever they wanted to be. This was how Aaron Siegel found himself standing at the foot of the tree of life everlasting, his feet soaked in a pool of blood, and the white corpse of Sophia Light staring up at him behind glassy eyes. A dark stream of blood ran from each of her wrists to the ground beneath her, and laying at her side was a thin silver razor, its edge marked red with Sophia's last breath. Aaron's hands trembled, the air catching in his throat and threatening to suffocate him. He fell to his knees at her side, flecks of blood splashing up onto her face with the impact. Her skin was cold, like it had been so many times before, he thought, and while Aaron had been here before, he felt a knowing dread creep up his spine and fix itself around his heart. "Death!" he screamed, and as he had screamed before. "Death! Reveal yourself! Take me! Take me instead of her!" Only the rain answered, each droplet an eye of a silent and watchful God that did not care. Aaron looked around desperately, blood and water soaking his clothes as he dug into his mind for any answer, any way out. "Death! Honor your promise! Give her back! Give her back, damn it!" He sat next to Sophia's body for hours, painfully taking each breath and hoping he might wake up. Sometime long ago, in a place far from this one, each inhale was a desperate question, and each exhale the same hollow response. It was not until some time later that he noticed the stained scrap of paper clutched in her right hand. He carefully unwrapped her fingers and opened the tiny roll, reading its elegantly penned words. "Aaron, I am not who I was when we first met. Every time I have walked with death along that quiet road back to your side, I have become less of who I am. I have become less of who I was, and I no longer recognize this thing I am. I'm so sorry, but I can't continue to be this way any longer. I was the one who gave Calvin Lucian our last vials from the Foundation and put your godless lance in his hand. I saw his path and saw the red line that draws him towards you. I thought that maybe I would see him break your convictions, and I would have you as my own again and undo the mistake I made when I set you on this path all those years ago. But I had not considered how very little of Sophia Light I am now. Nothing stands between you and those convictions now. There are no more distractions. I would hope that this would give you some semblance of peace, a chance to walk away and live out the rest of your life like we might have. I want this for you, even though I know this changes nothing. He is still waiting for you, and you will still meet him. Maybe I'll see you again. Maybe I'll be waiting for you on that distant shore. Sophia," before curling it into a ball in his clenched fist. His breath came hard and sharp now. His eyes threatened to burst through his skull. Standing slowly and shuddering, he walked across the garden for what may as well have been 1,000 years, towards a place where the grass was not green and the waters were not clear. He had been here once, before, when temptation had drawn him towards infinity and purpose had stayed his hand. The sky grew darker and the rain poured harder, and slowly the flora around him withered and died. He kept walking past the desolation of an old Eden, towards a point marked with an impact crater that stretched nearly a mile in every direction. The soil beneath his feet was hard and slick, and his footsteps sounded against it as he stumbled further down, hot tears burning on the sides of his face. When he finally came to rest on the crater floor, he moved swiftly towards its epicenter. There, resting where it had for 10,000 years, was the crumpled form of an angel, its armor crushed from the impact and twisted. Despite the thin layer of ash that covered its form and obscured its features, the shining words on its helm were still visible. Star of the Morning. Laying not far behind it was something glittering, in the dirt, half buried in the ground but gleaming as if it was new. A golden sword, radiating with heat and power. Aaron approached it and pulled it from the earth as if it were butter. His eyes grew dark, his convictions consumed him, and in the flash he was gone. The scrap of paper, the lines on it so deftly and meticulously applied, fell to the ground and was washed away in the rain. "Now, it is beneath the mountain," the journal said, "that the overseers keep their watch. I have spent many years studying this structure, attempting to peer into its depths, with little fortune. There is but a single entrance, the front gate, which is sealed from within and guarded by the Foundation's red right hand. It is within this structure that you will find the final 2 overseers, who have not been seen in public since before the Foundation's inception. It is this author's belief that the only souls capable of entering this quiet fortress to convene with them are the overseers themselves and no one else." Calvin read on. "It is this, then, that I leave you with, dear reader. The sum of the time and energy I have dedicated into the observation and understanding of these 13 individuals is presented upon these pages. What fortune or ruin this knowledge brings you is your own. As for me, I will enjoy the distance I put between myself and they. To do otherwise would no doubt bring upon yourself a devastating end. Yours most truthfully," the ending stated simply, "Ukulele." Calvin closed the journal and set it beside him on the ground. He was resting on a slope, one that dropped down into a valley far below him, and across he could see the towering steel doors of Site-01. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, but Calvin could see the path forward, clearly, a winding dirt road that led to the gate of the most secure facility within the Foundation, one that had never been breached. He had destroyed his phone days ago. After he left Adam, he had feared that the insurgency might come after him. There could be no distractions now. He was too close to his goal. Only a half-mile of air and 100 feet of stone separated him from his destiny now. He had left Olivia's body in a cave nearby, covered from the elements and hidden from prying eyes. He had done this with an apology and a promise. "I will make this right. I'll come back for you." Leaving the journal, he grabbed only the spear and descended. As night crossed over the valley and the stars awoke in the sky, Calvin realized he could hear little else but the sound of crickets and the whisper of wind. Nothing else stirred. In the quiet surrounding him, he heard Adam's voice, echoing endlessly in his mind. "Please, Calvin, please, don't do this. Please, don't leave me." He approached the door slowly, ever aware of his surroundings, but he neither saw nor heard any sign of any living souls. And within a few moments he was standing before the 2 monolithic steel slabs, himself, alone and untouched. He reached out a hand to touch one, hesitating slightly, and then pushed forward. The door, easily 10 times his height, slid open without a sound. He stepped inside the chamber, within, his eyes adjusting to the low light. The doors behind him slid shut, and he was met with a single, massive chamber dotted with tunnels and staircases that led off of it in every direction. In the center of the chamber was a caged elevator car, which Calvin approached and studied carefully. It was old, he could tell, but meticulously handcrafted. There was a single button on it, but it required a key to press. He stepped away and continued forward. At the far end of the room was another door, this one framed within the arrows of the Foundation seal. It was heavy in wood, and its frame was a rich stone archway with detailed images. Monsters and miracles, towers that stretched to the heavens, and others that lay deep below. A race of humanoids worshipping a dead god, a massive machine sleeping beneath the earth, dark and empty eyes, the faces of animals without names, a metal suit from a mysterious future. These and many more filled out the archway, but Calvin did not notice the archway, he noticed the man standing in front of it. He had not seen this man before, but something about him seemed familiar. The man was tall, almost impossibly so, easily 2 meters. The man's entire body was wrapped in metallic plates, curving around his body as if they were fabric. Wires ran across the armor's surface and steel tubes down its back, and at first Calvin was not sure it was a man at all, but behind the sharp, sleek helmet lay blue eyes, human eyes. Watching Calvin closely from the distance they stood across. Calvin stood the spear by his side. "Who are you?" "I am Purpose, the Red Right Hand," the man said, his voice a powerful baritone that echoed off the walls of the cavernous chamber. "I didn't see you in South Africa," Calvin said, steadying himself. "I might have thought you would stand alongside your comrades." "I am the will of the Foundation," the voice continued, "and it is here the Foundation resides." Calvin didn't respond right away. The familiarity of this individual struck him, and there was something uncanny about the way his voice rang out from inside its metal cage. "Do I know you?" he said after a moment. The figure did not move. "To know me is to know the Foundation," Purpose said. "My words are its words, and my voice is its voice." In his mind's eye, Calvin saw briefly a memory flash across the edge of his consciousness, the faintest echo of a time when a dashing young Foundation agent, one with black hair and blue eyes, had laughed in a sonorous baritone while single-handedly holding back a group of insurgency operatives. What had they called him? Lament. Calvin readied his firearm in one hand. "What happens now?" "I have been tasked with protecting this sanctum until 051 returns. None shall enter without his word." "He isn't here?" Calvin cursed under his breath. If he had fled, perhaps to a far corner of the earth, it would be months to find him again. He could not lose this opportunity. "No," Purpose said, seemingly without pause. "He is here." Without another word, the monolith figure stepped aside. Calvin hesitated, his sidearm still locked into his fist. After nothing happened for a moment, and then another, he relaxed. The weapon slid back into its holster, and Calvin stepped forward. Each step he took brought him closer to the unwavering eyes of Purpose, but it did not move. It only watched, and stood aside. As he went to pass through the archway, he paused. "Purpose," he said, his voice low. "Will anyone else be joining us?" "No." "Make sure they don't." "As you wish." Calvin entered the arched doorway, looked back once more into the solemn eyes of Purpose, and then disappeared into the darkness beyond. Break. The passageway beyond was not large, but it was ornately decorated with carvings into the rock face of its walls. In the low light he could only make out the faintest of shapes, but each seemed even more detailed and intricate than the last. He ran his hand across the smooth surface, his fingers feeling the hard edges of faces, buildings, gods. In the silence of the tunnel, his footsteps were accompanied by whispers, voices that should have been too far away to be heard, but were just audible here in this place between places. He was not there long. Eventually he stepped out into another room, larger even than the last, whose focus was a long, ovular table at its center, lit by numerous spotlights hanging somewhere far above it. Screens lined the walls, each flipping quickly between different cameras. He saw long hallways, bright overhead lights, containment facilities, doctors and researchers sitting in laboratories, security personnel standing guard by doors, and then monsters, nightmare creatures that lurked back and forth in glass-paned rooms, demons that crawled into their own skin and then out again, unmoving statues. And behind everything hung the largest screen of all. When Calvin entered the room, the large screen lit up, and he saw scenes of himself, moments in his life that led him to this moment. He saw himself being sent to a youth detention center, Wellwood Rehabilitory, when he was only 12. He saw himself joining the military, and then being approached by an agent of the insurgency. He saw himself training with other operatives, being appointed a commander by Delta. His first meeting with Anthony, his first with Olivia, the three of them meeting Adam. The long stretch of brutality and agony that had brought him here. In each scene, looked down upon as if by someone standing just behind him, Calvin now felt a sickly feeling. He saw himself not pushing forward as he had imagined at the time, but instead being pulled along, his body bound to one end of a long and sickly string that stretched between where he had been and infinity. He saw where the string began and followed it to its end, across the world to the edge of death and back, and now here in this room. Across the floor, beyond the table, to the man sitting on the stairs leading up to the screen at the far end of the room. The man wore slacks and had recently been wearing a jacket. His white shirt was stained with blood on the chest and sleeves, and dark lines ran down his face. There was something laying next to him on the stair, something wrapped in the man's jacket that Calvin couldn't quite make out. He took a step toward this man, but the man didn't move. "You are 051, he said tentatively. He heard the man say something but couldn't make it out. "What?" "Aaron," he heard the man say. "My name is Aaron." "Aaron?" Calvin repeated. "Aaron Siegel? 051? "Yes." Calvin nodded. "The second overseer. Where are they?" Adam didn't respond, but even from across the room, Calvin could feel the immediate chill in the air. "So it's just you?" Calvin asked. "Yep," Aaron responded. "It's just me." Calvin drew his firearm and, in an instant, loosed 5 good rounds toward the man on the stairs. Each, he knew, flew truly, but as they approached Aaron, they hissed and luminesced brightly before dissolving into the air. He fired again with the same response. He stopped firing. "Stand up, Aaron Siegel," he said, holstering his weapon and pulling the spear off his back. "Let's finish it." The man didn't move. "Where did you get that spear?" Calvin didn't respond. After a moment, he heard the man laugh. "What's so funny?" he said. Aaron rubbed at one of his eyes with the palm of his hand. "You have traveled across a lifetime to get to this place and find me, and you're going to kill me with a spear?" His laughter stopped. "You don't even know why you're here." "I'm here because when I kill you, I kill the Foundation. I kill the Foundation and the universe can heal. You are a cancer." Aaron stood up lazily, his eyes half open, as he stared across the room towards where Calvin stood. No, you're like me, filled with righteous conviction, spurring you forward. It wasn't fate, it wasn't destiny, it was a sheer, unspeakable, unknowable force of an unimpeded will. You there and me here, in a trillion worlds, in a billion universes, we would each find ourselves here. Conviction led me to this place, just as it led you. He stepped down from the platform, the bundle of his jacket still lying behind him. 2 unstoppable forces, hurtling towards each other with nothing between them. He turned, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a gleaming golden sword. As he held it in his outstretched hand, a tormented scream leapt from within the blade, and it caught fire, bright white flames licking up the edge. In the light of this sword, Calvin could see Aaron's eyes. They were his own. "There's nothing else to say, Calvin Lucian," Aaron said, the sword settling down by his side. "Either your convictions will be broken today, or mine will, and one of us will die." He nodded. "Let's finish it." Back. Step 001/01. Open file. 051, the founder. Caucasian male, appears to be in his late 30s, believed to be Aaron Siegel, a physicist who attended Cornell University in the early 1900s, became involved with Frederick Williams, the individual later known as the administrator, shortly after the turn of the century. Led the first research team of what would eventually become the SCP Foundation, along with 0513, 0510, 052, and several others. The events that led him to founding and assuming command of the Foundation proper are currently unknown. Despite once being fairly active in the day-to-day running of the Foundation, 051 has pulled away in recent years and has not been seen in public for the last few decades, leaving 057 to manage the entire organization. While his death has been assumed on a number of occasions, one very high-level source confirms that he continues to vote during council meetings. While nearly every other overseer maintains a private residence, 051 is believed to live at Overwatch Command. The location of this facility is unknown. Decryption complete. Access log. Chapter 13. The Way It Ends. Now. The sword in Aaron's hand flashed, and with a dull roar, it tore across the room towards where Calvin stood. He jumped backwards, knocking it away with the butt of his spear, sending a shower of sparks cascading across the ground. Aaron pulled up, and flames leapt from the blade in all directions, forcing Calvin to spin around to avoid them. He gripped the back end of the spear and spun it over his head as he came to a rest, and the tip of it barely missed Aaron, as he too danced away from the end of the long weapon. Calvin swung low. The spearhead just narrowly missing Aaron's left thigh, and his momentum carried him forward slightly. Off balance, he caught a glimpse of the flaming red steel falling towards him and hit the ground, rolling to dodge the burst of fire as Aaron buried the sword into the ground. With no shortage of effort, Aaron lifted the sword again and brought it down again and again and again, each time forcing Calvin to scramble backward from the inferno. He found an opening and quickly scrambled to his feet, rearing back in the moment before Aaron brought the sword back around. He loosed the spear. The air in the room grew tight suddenly, and there was a low, dull sound that seemed to pull all other noise out of it. A moment later, there was a bang, and the spear was buried in the wall across from them, the impact having sent long, jagged cracks through the stone. Aaron looked down at his arm and saw blood and ash. The spear had nicked him as it passed. He turned back towards Calvin, who was also staring at Aaron's arm. Without hesitating, he pulled the sword to the left, and fire leapt from the edge of the blade, billowing around like a curtain drawn over Calvin's body. He leapt to the side and avoided it, but Aaron was upon him again, drawing up for a killing blow. In desperation, Calvin threw out a hand to stop the blade from falling on him, and then the spear was back in his hand, catching the flaming sword as it crashed down onto it. Aaron, surprised, hesitated and drawing back again. Calvin pushed up on the spear with both hands, knocking Aaron backwards and giving him the opportunity to swing the razor end of the spear around at him from the side. Aaron ducked and then caught the next pass with his sword, sending sparks cascading across the ground. The overseer went on the offensive again, taking long, sweeping cuts towards Calvin as he ducked and rolled out of the way of streaking fire. He skated around the long table with 13 chairs as flames lapped up the wall of the monitors, melting them and turning them jet black. When he turned back, Aaron was upon him again, but this time the golden sword came from below, not above, and caught Calvin in the side. He shouted and twirled away, the long end of the spear forcing Aaron back. He could feel hot blood beginning to soak through his shirt. As he gathered himself, Aaron stopped and brought the sword down to his side. For a moment, the two of them stood breathing heavily, each eyeing the other carefully from opposite sides of the room. "You are an incredible testament to the will of the insurgency," Aaron said slowly, never taking his eyes off Calvin. "A younger me would have been envious." Calvin wiped blood off his mouth with the back of his hand. "What do you have to be envious of?" Aaron crouched down. "When I was younger, I made mistakes. Costly mistakes. I always thought those mistakes were because my resolve wasn't strong enough. But here you are. Your resolve is every bit as strong as mine, maybe stronger, and here you are, standing exactly where I stood, making those same mistakes." "I'm nothing like you," Calvin said. "I know what you are, traitor. You were made the engineer of the insurgency, and you betrayed us for all the power they could give you. You betrayed your ideals for a golden throne and everlasting life." Aaron looked up. His eyes were sad. "I'm not the engineer, Calvin. I never was. Vince Arians was the engineer. We built it together, but he was its chief architect. He wrote the Summa Modus Operandi and designed the insurgency as a check against us. Against me." He stood up, taking the sword in his hand again. "You are right about one thing, though. I did betray you. I betrayed all of you. But not to forsake my ideals. A moment came where I had to balance those ideals against something horrible, and they were not strong enough to sustain me. The sword lit up again, and in the dim light of the cavern, the flames of the sword danced against Aaron's eyes. I'm going to kill you, Calvin, but not because I hate you or because I'm afraid you'll usurp me. I'm going to kill you because I'm afraid that your will now is stronger than mine was then. I'm going to kill you because if you kill me, you're going to be standing in the exact place I was so many years ago, and you will be stronger. He raised the sword above his head, and from the hilt came an inconceivable blast of fire. It arced into the sky, scorching the ceiling of the cavern and burning out the lights there. The flames billowed down the walls, creeping into cracks in the rock and charring every surface they touched. As they reached the floor, the flames crashed across the chamber like waves, turning and churning and throwing smoke and ash into the air. The entirety of the flaming mass began to spin as Aaron brought the sword around his head, and then again until the chamber was a single flaming maelstrom, and then he saw Calvin, leaping through the air off the table in the center of the room, spear in hand. He turned to block it and heard the sound of a crashing locomotive as the spear soared towards him. He brought the blade down towards it, and on the moment of impact, the shining golden steel glistened and then shattered. The spear caught Aaron in the chest and threw him across the room, pinning him to the stone wall beneath the monitor at the front of the chamber. The broken fragments of the sword fell out of his hand and scattered across the ground. Behind him, where the spear had entered stone, a thick crack now ran up towards the ceiling. The fire that had consumed the room lingered a moment longer and then went out. Aaron gasped and slumped against the wall. He raised a hand to his chest and felt blood seeping through his fingers. He put one hand weakly around the shaft of the spear and tried to pull it, but had no strength left to do so. He coughed, and blood pooled in the back of his throat. His body felt numb, and his limbs began to grow cold and lifeless. His vision became blurred, and each breath became shorter and harder. Then Calvin was standing in front of him, bloodied himself and bruised, but standing. When Aaron saw him, he laughed. Blood splattered against his teeth. "Spoke too soon," he said quietly. Calvin crouched down on one knee and looked him square in the eyes. "It's over. You're the last of them. And now that you're done, this world can begin to heal again." Aaron's head rolled to his side and then straightened up. He brought his eyes up to meet Calvin's, who suddenly felt the same enormous presence he had that day in the Somali warehouse with Delta, months prior. He had the distinct and unsettling sensation of his entire being, mind, body, and soul, being inspected by something considerably larger than he was. Then, after a moment, it was gone. Aaron laughed softly and coughed. "No, Calvin, you really don't understand. I thought so too, but I was wrong. We were wrong. Arians couldn't see it, but I saw it. He wouldn't understand, and I could never tell him, and he died thinking I had betrayed him." He gasped for air. "I loved him. He was my brother, but he didn't know." Aaron's breathing became shallow. "It's not enough, Calvin. It's not enough. The cancer, it wasn't us. And it wasn't Frederick Williams. It's the Foundation. It was always the Foundation." Calvin stood up. "Enough. It's over. I'm going downstairs and I'm going to finish it. This is the way it ends." Aaron took a few more short breaths and said, "No, it's not." His eyes glazed over and something like a name began to form on his lips. Sophia, I'm... He tried desperately to suck in a final breath, but with no strength left in his body, simply collapsed against the spear. Aaron Siegel was dead. Calvin stepped back from him unsteadily, his head racing. Small glowing tendrils of melted plastic and metal occasionally dropped from the ceiling around him, barely casting so much as a shadow on an almost perfectly dark room. He stood there in the darkness, catching his breath, until he felt a familiar presence join him in the darkness. "He's dead," Calvin said, his own voice somehow alien to him. I killed him. Purpose stood unmoving at the back of the chamber. It brought 2 hands up and clapped once, and all around the room, short glowing cylinders rose up from the stone floor, illuminating the chamber. Calvin took one hesitant step back and then another, and left Aaron's body pinned to the wall as he crossed back up to the stairwell, leading to the main antechamber. The massive humanoid was waiting for him there. Purpose, he said quietly. There exists a room in this facility where someone could unmake the Foundation, correct? Purpose did not move. Correct. Calvin nodded. It's below the antechamber, isn't it? Correct. Take me there. The 2 of them passed through the strange tunnel of whispers between the antechamber and the meeting hall until they were standing back in the open space beneath the depictions of the Foundation's legacy. The massive pendulum above them passed over slowly and silently, and the faint ticking of the arms on an enormous clock somewhere in the distance was the only sound in the space aside from their own footsteps. There, in the center of the chamber, was the elevator. Purpose approached it first, extending his palm to the door, which swiftly slid open. Calvin moved to step inside it, but hesitated as Purpose put a hand on his shoulder. I am duty-bound to tell you, he said softly, the baritone of his voice echoing through the hall, that once you step inside the elevator, there is no going back. There is only one decision to be made past this point, and it is not one that can be unmade. Calvin nodded. I know. He turned to look back toward the massive doors leading down to where Aaron Siegel's body was pinned to the stone wall, deep beneath the earth. It's time. Purpose stepped aside, and Calvin settled into the elevator. As he did, the door behind him slid shut, and he began to descend. The elevator stopped, and as the door slid open, Calvin had to squint against the light. He stepped out into a room, one with a high ceiling and dark wooden floors. Against the far wall of the chamber was a long, sweeping window that encircled nearly the entire room. And outside the window he could see the mountainside and the setting sun. The walls were lined with bookcases, and the books in them were thick and old, but clearly well maintained. On one wall was another bank of monitors, much like the ones on the walls in the meeting room above them, only these showed different scenes. In one he saw a woman slitting her wrists in the rain, in another a man with a bullet in his skull falling out of a train. He saw the ruined fortress in the mountains where they had camped for the night, and the flaming city that Green had devastated. He saw the airport and the body of a handsome man twisted and broken in the metal carnage. He saw Aaron Siegel with a spear shoved through his chest. In the middle of a room was a rich wooden desk, neatly arranged and clean. A monitor was mounted to it, and on the screen was the Foundation's secure login portal. Calvin walked beside it, and as he took a seat in the high-backed chair behind the desk, he noticed something strange on the far end of the desk, a black metal rotary phone. He turned to the computer and began logging in. The system prompted him with biometrics by producing a fingerprint and iris scanner from within the desk. He reached out instinctively and stared into the flashing red light, and then both retracted into the wood and disappeared. The screen displayed a successful login, and then the screens around the room changed. Each monitor showed a different image, but it was clear what they all had in common. They were Foundation sites. One screen identified Site 19, and then another Site 42, and one as Site 77. They filled every available inch of glowing LEDs until every surface was a Foundation site. Then a single option appeared on the screen on his desk. Terminate. Calvin felt the air catch in his chest. He placed a hand on the keyboard, his fingers hovering over the moment of final victory. He took a deep breath and the phone began ringing. He hesitated, his fingertip a hair's breadth away from the key. He turned towards it to confirm what he was hearing, and the phone rang again, and again, and again. On the 5th ring he answered, his hands now acting independently from his mind. There was something robotic about the motion, something instinctual that he could not identify, yet drove him all the same. He picked up the receiver carefully, as if it was something alive, and set it against his ear. He heard only silence on the other end of the line. Hello? A voice crackled over the receiver. It was a man's voice, no doubt, but there was something about it that caused the hair on Calvin's arms to stand on end. He felt like he was hearing something that was both very far away and occupying the same space he was. "Congratulations are in order, Mr. Lucian," the voice said, its timbre light and its tone smooth. "You've demonstrated exceptional initiative. I'm certain it will serve us well." Calvin's pulse quickened. "Who is this?" "Who am I? Please, Mr. Lucian, surely you've guessed by now. I'm the man you've been trying to kill." A line of sweat formed on Calvin's forehead. What do you mean?" "I'm the administrator, Mr. Lucian." Something else appeared in Calvin's soul, something like fear, but far more primal. That's not possible. The administrator was killed. Aaron Siegel killed him." The voice hemmed softly. No, he didn't. He killed the man called Frederick Williams." Frederick Williams was the administrator." The voice chuckled. It wasn't an unfriendly sound. Again, not quite. See, Mr. Williams was just a man tugging upon a frayed string, slowly unraveling the universe. He found the string, studied the string, categorized it, classified it, and eventually he became it. That was how the Foundation was born. The voice on the other end paused. Frederick Williams saw something larger than himself and planted the seed that would make it grow. Aaron Siegel killed him for it, but part of him is still here. He's still here because Aaron Siegel killed a man, but did not kill the seed. Do you see it yet? He did not kill me." Calvin's arms felt weak. A heavy weight settled across him. "What are you?" A signature on a document, a suit in a boardroom, a voice on the phone. Mr. Siegel realized the truth too late. Though Frederick Williams was the Foundation's first administrator, he was not the administrator. I am, Mr. Lucian. I exist because of the Foundation, and the Foundation exists because of me. What is it that Purpose is always saying? The voice paused, considering. To know my nature is to know the nature of the Foundation, something like that. Calvin didn't respond, and the voice continued. "Did you genuinely think Mr. Siegel joined the Foundation for power? That the Foundation seduced him and he fell for its wiles and ways?" The voice scoffed. "No. He reached a conclusion and made a decision. At the expense of his ideals. He did it for the same reason you're standing here today. Because he wanted to finish the job." Those words were suddenly hostile, but the voice settled again. "Then you came along, and after all the warnings, you still decided to put a spear through his heart. The only man standing between myself and all of creation." The voice paused for a moment. "And then?" "You picked up the phone." A tiny flash of resistance surged through Calvin's chest. "And what if I hadn't picked it up?" The voice on the other end laughed. It was a harsh, sudden sound, the sort of noise that wakes you before you even hear it. "Don't be silly, Calvin. Someone always picks up the phone." "I could still walk away." The words felt like chalk on Calvin's tongue. He knew what was coming. He struggled against the growing weight. He looked back at the monitor, at the cursor. It felt so far away. "Yes, you could. You could walk away right now, and nobody but you and me would ever know you were here. You could even press the button there and see what that means for the Foundation." Calvin could feel a creeping smile forming on the lips of the disembodied voice. And then, in a few minutes, the phone would ring, again and again and again, and no one would answer. No one would tell them what to do, Mr. Lucian. When those sites are broken up and the monsters inside are loosed from their cages, billions will die, and then more. The voice laughed again. "And I'll still be here." It continued. "You said it yourself. I'm a cancer. I'm the anomaly. I was born when the first man saw the first miracle, the emergent conscience of the entire Foundation. Frederick Williams didn't realize what he had done when he did it, but Mr. Siegel figured it out in time. Who do you think is in the best position to stop that cancer from spreading now? Certainly not Mr. Siegel. He's impaled on a wall upstairs. You killed the rest of his protectors, those he charged to continue his work if he ever died. Who do you think will contain me now?" They, Calvin heard himself speaking, but didn't know why. They were evil. Evil, the voice barked. Honestly, Calvin, this has been your greatest failing thus far. Believing that you are somehow in the moral right. You have justified your actions because you were doing good, and the enemy was doing evil. You never stopped to consider decisions, Calvin, and why people make them. It continued. The accountant, selected by Mr. Siegel because of the influence my existence was having on markets. He was there to keep my actions in check. He never hurt a single person who didn't deserve it. Most of the Foundation's magically appearing money came from despots and swindlers. The liar was a good person with an unfortunate condition that was given a chance to use their newfound abilities to keep the world from descending into madness. The outsider, that poor girl, she was just a researcher in a difficult position, who would have rather died than let you have your way with her. Consider that. The voice paused as if it was thinking. There were some rotten apples, certainly, typically those given the most power. The archivist, the kid, the American. But even they had their uses, and they were kept in check by the others. Before your intervention, the archivist was content to stay in her books and never bother another living person. The kid was a tool, Calvin, and a powerful one, but can you fault a child for following directions? It paused again. Green. That one was maybe the worst, but what is there beyond her? A group of people doing their best in an impossible situation, some driven mad by their responsibilities and others simply a pawn of a larger machine. Then along comes you, and from your lofty moral peaks, you would call these poor people evil. You justified their murders for that very reason. There was silence for a moment as Calvin failed to find the words to respond. When it was clear he had nothing to give in return, the voice sighed. No, Calvin, the voice said with a soft, unquestionable finality. There is no good. There is no evil. He could no longer stand. Calvin sank into the chair, cradling the phone to his ear. The voice on the other line continued. You'll find the job has certain perks. Who knows? Aaron Siegel couldn't kill me, but maybe you'll find a way. And sometimes, if you try very hard, catch it in the right light and squint just enough, you might even manage to convince yourself that you're doing the right thing. Calvin said nothing. The world around him was empty. All that remained was the phone and the voice. In the back of his mind, he saw Adam lying on the ground, screaming his name, begging him to come back. Olivia, her skin broken and blood seeping through the cracks in her face, her eyes glassy and unseeing. And Anthony, collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. He heard the clock upstairs chime out the hour. Gone, 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 gone. Cheer up, Mr. Lucian. Our work is only just beginning. The line went dead. Calvin placed the phone down with a click. The only sound in the room was the beating of his own heart, a sound that echoed the chiming of the clock. Gone, gone, gone. He stared across the room, and in his mind's eye he saw something, an echo of a dream from a long, long time ago. He saw Aaron Siegel standing at the desk with the phone to his ear, trembling. He saw Sophia Light standing next to him, looking saddened but unsurprised. Then he saw his friend, Anthony Wright, the man who had been Vincent Arians, standing in front of the desk, gun drawn. He had it leveled at Aaron's heart. "Put the effing phone down," he heard Anthony say. "Put it down, Aaron. Let's go. Let's get out of here. Come on, I won't let you do this." "He has to," Sophia began. "Shut the F up," Anthony said, his hand shaking. "You brought him here. This is your poison. You planned this all along. You knew what was waiting for him here." He turned back to Aaron. "Aaron, please. Everything we've done. Think of it. All the sacrifices we've made. We need to make this right. We need to go. We can still do it. Just put the phone down. Please, put the phone down." Aaron's expression was dead, his eyes lifeless. He looked down the barrel of the gun, like somebody might look at an oncoming train. Something heavy and inevitable. Anthony shook his head. "Aaron, please, please, come on. Let's go. Leave her here. Leave her here to rot." She has nothing for you, Aaron. She's got nothing. Put the phone down. He lifted the gun a little higher. Put the phone down, damn it, please. Aaron's eyes focused on him. His body was shaking. I can't, Vince, he said softly. His voice was hollow. I can't. Anthony's face turned red, his veins pressing against his skin and his eyes darkening. He screamed, hate and frustration and vitriol spilling out of him in a torrent. Then Calvin heard gunshots as Anthony emptied the clip into the ceiling above them, spilling rock and debris down onto the desk. When he was done, he took a deep breath. Fine, he said, not looking up at either of them. Fine, I can't kill you, Aaron. I don't have it in me. Maybe if I'm lucky, your mistakes will do it for me. He took a step forward and sat the empty gun on the desk. Without another word, he turned back toward the elevator and disappeared out of sight. Neither Aaron nor Sophia moved. The vision faded. Calvin was alone again at the desk. He looked down and saw the gun was sitting on the table. He looked up and saw the holes were still in the rock. Then there was the phone, sitting silently on the desk. 30 seconds later, it began to ring, and ring, and ring, and ring, and ring, and ring. On the 7th ring, Calvin picked up the phone. Back. Epilogue. Ouroboros. Site 01, file serve, showing file 1 of 1, step 001/13, open file, 0513, vacant, step 001/12, open file, 0512, vacant, step 001/11, open file, 0511, vacant, step 001/10, open file, 0510, vacant, step 001/09, open file, 059, vacant, step 001/08, open file, 058, vacant, step 001/07, open file, 057, vacant, step 001/06, open file, 056, vacant, step 001/05, open file, 055, vacant, step 001/04, open file, 054, vacant, step 001/03, open file, 053, vacant, step 001/02, open file, 052, vacant, step 001/01, open file, 051, the usurper, Caucasian male, formerly Calvin Lucian, access file. Epilogue. Ouroboros. After. A long black car pulled around to the entrance of a sprawling business campus and was met at the door by a man in a sleek black suit. The driver parked and came around to open the door, and Calvin stepped out of the vehicle. His hair was gray and his eyes held weight, but his gaze was sharp and his blue suit was crisp and clean. The man who met him was younger, the Foundation's newest site director. When Calvin had stood and adjusted his coat, the man approached him and extended a hand. Good morning, Overseer, the man said behind a genial smile. Welcome to Site 108. We're thrilled to be hosting you. Calvin smiled meekly and shook the man's hand. It's my pleasure, Director House, he responded. Gives me the opportunity to knock out 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak. Apologies for the delay in getting out here. Current events had been keeping me tied down elsewhere. House nodded solemnly. So I've heard. A team from Site 17 arrived this morning. I believe they came straight from the crash site. Calvin winced. Indeed. I suppose I should try and talk to them first before we kick things off. He looked down at his watch. Have the others arrived yet? House pulled his phone from his pocket and leafed through a document. The directors have all arrived, as have all the overseers except 052. Calvin nodded. She'll be arriving shortly. Inform me when she does. House nodded and promptly escorted Calvin into the main lobby of Site 108. They were followed by Calvin's security detail, who had finished sweeping the site and now fell in behind him. They entered the secure wing of the site, and before too long had reached a small conference room off the main hub of that area. House gestured toward the door and stepped aside. "My team is available if you ever need anything," he said. "Please don't hesitate to let us know if you do." Calvin nodded in response, and House turned down the hallway and disappeared. Calvin passed through the door to the conference room, which was abuzz with the response team he had created in the wake of the crash. To the man, they looked exhausted. When he entered, the team leader, an up-and-coming doctor named Tory Lang, approached him. "Overseer," she said, bowing slightly. "Good to see you." Calvin smiled. "And you as well, Dr. Lang. Forgive me for my tardiness. My security team was perhaps too cautious on our approach." Lang nodded swiftly. "Of course, sir. Given the circumstances, the caution is appropriate. We only arrived earlier this morning." Calvin looked at the projected screen in front of them. Flashing across it were pictures of a crater, with the twisted wreckage of a jetliner still smoldering inside. In every picture, there were members of the Foundation response teams pouring over the site. He squinted at the screen. "Loss of life?" he asked. "Minimal, fortunately," Lang said, handing him a folder. "The flight team was small, just 3 pilots, a mechanic, and a 4-man security detail. Another casualty from where the wing landed, here." She pointed to a picture of a farmhouse that had been cut nearly in 2 by falling debris. "And then 2 more civilians we had to terminate after they were exposed to the anomaly while looking through the wreckage before we got there." 11 total, Calvin said. "Not great." Lang flinched slightly. "No, not great. We were able to recover most of the artifacts on board, but a few were damaged in the crash, and—" Calvin raised an eyebrow. "Yes?" She shifted uncomfortably. "A few were missing, sir. A handful of our sealed containers had been opened, either by the crash or by external tampering, and the contents were removed." She pointed toward the bottom of the page. "Here are the details. 3 unclassified artifacts, 1 that was pending evaluation, and the soul jar." Calvin nodded slowly. "That is unfortunate. Have we seen any chatter about these on the blue markets?" "Nothing out of the ordinary. We don't usually expect to see anything show up when the insurgency is involved, sir. They don't sell the artifacts." "Ah, yes, that's right," Calvin said, tapping the side of his head with a finger. "Forgive me, I'd forgotten. Have we heard anything out of the insurgency, then?" Lang motioned to one of the other agents in the back of the room, who pulled up a video on the projected screen. "This was posted on a Knights of Truth webpage late last night. We got to it pretty quickly and have flagged all other known services for it, but we're still keeping an eye out for anything else." Calvin stared at the screen. "Has anyone seen this?" Lang shook her head. "No, sir. Insurgency propaganda carries a level 4 classification." He nodded again. "Good. Go ahead and take a break, Dr. Lang. Get your team some rest, and mine will take care of this." The doctor nodded in response, and the response team filed out of the conference room. Once they were gone, Calvin locked the door and took a seat in the front row. He pulled up a keyboard from the desk and pressed play. The video opened like all CI props did, the animation of the Foundation seal being pierced by 3 parallel arrows, forming the insurgency logo. As it faded out, a face appeared on the screen. Calvin had seen it before. Every other time he had to sit and watch one of these, but each time was no less difficult. It was a man, fully grown, sitting at a table, his blonde hair tied behind his head, and his beard neatly trimmed. He was wearing a flak jacket and had a gun in his hand. He was sitting at a table, and in front of him was a small ornate jar carved out of green jade. It was Adam. "Brothers and sisters of the reborn insurgency," he said, his voice a bark. "Today we have scored a great victory against those who would seek to undermine our reality. Today we have spat in the face of tyrants who would use the unraveling of creation for their own benefit, instead of seeking to heal it. We have brought their planes out of the sky and smote them against the earth, sending a clear message to their ivory tower that they are no longer safe, that they are no longer free to move about this world as they please. Our strength grows, and with it does our influence. The Foundation has been laid low today, but we cannot grow complacent. We cannot rest on our laurels. We must take this opportunity to strike again where they are weakest. We will cut their supply lines. We will sink their ships. We will derail their trains. We will undo the damage they have caused and make our world whole again." He stood and walked off screen, and when he came back, he was holding a sledgehammer. The camera zoomed out, and Adam leveled the hammer in both hands. "There is only one response fitting for fascists and tyrants, brothers and sisters. Our vengeance." He raised the hammer above his head and brought it down on the jar, shattering it and the table beneath it. A blast of light and sound burst out of the jar, and a plume of green smoke erupted into the air, obscuring the camera's view of Adam. After a moment, his voice cut back in. "I know you're watching, Calvin," he said, his voice barely a hiss. "This is the world you built. These are your towers, your planes. These deaths are on your hands. I am your red right hand. I am what you were too craven to do. You can sit there in your fortress that you should have burned to the ground, and you should not feel safe in it." His voice hesitated, and for a moment all Calvin could hear was Adam's breathing. The smoke began to clear, and he could see Adam more clearly now. He was no longer the young, thin boy he had been all those years ago. It had only been a few years, but he was muscular now, hardened. He had a scar on his neck, and a smaller one just above his eye. "I don't understand, Calvin. I've never understood you. I trusted you. We trusted you. Anthony, myself, Delta, and Olivia." He trailed off. "I've seen what you've done to her. I've seen the puppet you've been parading around, masquerading as an overseer. That's not her, Calvin. I don't know what sort of foul dealing you had to do to get that creature to walk and talk, but I knew Olivia, and she died, and that's not her." He slammed his fist against the wall. "You're a coward. You're a coward and a traitor, and I will make you suffer every day for the rest of your life for what you've done." He extended his arms out to both sides. "I am vengeance. I am wrath." The screen went dark. An hour later, he took a seat at the end of a long table. There were 13 chairs in total, 6 on each side and 1 at the head. He centered a folder full of papers in front of him, and then looked up. 12 pairs of eyes looked back at him. "Before we get started," he said, "I'd like to congratulate you all on your promotions. The insurgency's plot against this council cost us the lives of many of our finest administrators, and replacing them was no mean feat. Thanks to the dutiful efforts of our Site Directors Council and the Ethics Committee, we have put together a council that, I believe, will help us maintain stability through this transitionary period." He opened the folder in front of him and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "You've all received your designations, but for the purpose of this meeting, I want to read off the appointments and the departments you will be overseeing, in case any of you aren't sure who everyone here is." He scanned down the page. "Let's start here." One by one, he listed them all, notable doctors and agents of the Foundation being granted its highest promotion. There was a reorganizing in place as well. Positions that had been left vacant in the past were now under new management. Finance, applied influence, public awareness. He continued down the list until he reached the name before his own. He paused for a moment, his eyes wavering slightly, before reading it aloud. "Assuming the role of 052 is Agent Olivia Torres, who replaces the former 0513 in overseeing the Department of Occult Studies." He hesitated again, and a light murmuring swept across the room as its occupants focused in on the figure directly to his right. It didn't move an inch. He continued. "Then there's myself, of course, but my role will stay the same." He looked up from the briefing, all of the other faces at the table. His eyes passed over them all, but was careful to avoid the gaze just to his right, though he could feel it against his skull all the same. "Does anyone have any questions?" After a moment, he nodded. "Very well. Let's begin." That night, Calvin sat awake in his room, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen of his computer. He had moved the video file from earlier to his own secure server and then wiped it from the central database. It was part of a growing pile of documents, records of insurgency attacks, newspaper clippings, journal entries related to the insurgency. Unorganized as they were, it would be difficult to see the narrative, he thought. It would be difficult for someone to understand, to find their way to where he was now. So he opened a file editor with his administrative privileges and began writing. He attached everything, The papers they had recovered, pictures they had taken, lists of names, transcripts of conversations the all-seeing eye had access to, defunct as it was, the records had persisted. He collected it all and created a single document, one that would tell the whole story, one that would make sense. Principalis, he thought, would be a good classification. It was an old coalition designation used to identify the earliest known anomalous items they had discovered, but as far as he knew it had fallen out of service decades prior. Nobody will see this but me, he figured, so what does it matter anyway? The containment procedures were a directive. The Overseer Council would contain this new entity and maintain public safety while doing so. Had this been where emergency had sat, he wondered? Had he stayed up until the break of dawn, pushing himself past the point of exhaustion, seeking any new advantage over the bomb they were sitting on? Had Aaron grown complacent in his work? Would Calvin? Would some usurper rise to dethrone him just as he had? How would he explain what he had done? How would he explain that there was no other option? Would it matter? The door to his room creaked open, and a figure slid in slightly. The figure crossed the room and took a seat in the corner and stared at him. Calvin did not look at it. He knew what it was. He could not look at it. But how to describe it? What could he say that the next overseer would see and understand? He had been wrong. It had never been the council or the anomalies themselves. He had pulled back the cover of the heart of darkness and found only a mirror, a reflection of desire and meaning cast on himself. What was it that Purpose had said? To know me is to know the Foundation. He had looked upon the Foundation's true face and had seen his own, reaching for a ringing phone and a voice that did not compromise or negotiate. That is what it would be. To know SCP-001 is to know the nature of the Foundation. He closed the laptop and set it aside. In the dim glow of the security lights outside, he could see Olivia's face illuminated against the darkness. She did not blink. Her eyes were fixed on his own. She will not be the same, the Avatar had told him. You cannot cross that threshold and return as you were. Good evening, Olivia, he said quietly. Are you ready for bed? He asked her despite knowing that she no longer slept, that she would stay in the corner watching him, unblinking, the entire night. A grim rattling filled his ears as Olivia's jaw opened too far, and a grating, grinding croak crawled its way out of her throat. Calvin. The thing that had been Olivia said. Calvin. Calvin did not move. He did not breathe. Olivia, he said softly, please, not tonight. I can't do it tonight. Just go to sleep. She sat unmoving the rest of the night. Calvin did not sleep either. In the morning she was gone, and he was alone again. He got up, got dressed, and poured himself a cup of coffee. He opened his computer and began reading through the file again. After a moment, the phone on his desk rang as it had so many times before. As he had so many times before. 051 answered. Finn.